This is the Light Minds podcast series. We're talking to Mike, who is a coach specializing in emotional resolution, meditation, relationships, and communication. In the last podcast, we talked about generational trauma and how that informed your coaching technique. And so today, I want to talk about how the process works and specifically how emotions are felt and experienced. Can you talk about the different layers of emotions, maybe starting with the surface emotions that others see?
hmm Yeah, let me first say that the coaching technique or protocol that we use, uh, that the whole Resolve book is based on, is really all about shifting the emotions. There is, in my opinion, very little intellectual discourse or talk coaching involved, because we feel that the problem is resolved. It starts at the energetic emotional level, and therefore it can be resolved there. And so I just want to see that that's why the emotions are and understanding how they work is so key to what we do. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So, what are some examples of those emotions?
Okay. So let me just go through to show you the emotional levels. Let me just go through what I would do if I was working with somebody then. So I do coach a lot around relationships and communication, especially when there's, communication breakdown, especially in marriages or family issues, because a lot of the coaching that I do involve working with families dealing with mental health issues, behavioral issues, addiction, and stuff like that. So there's usually communication breakdown. And so a lot of the problems that clients come to me with are all about, I'm having a problem talking to my son, daughter, or husband, and every time I try to talk to them, there's a breakdown. I always ended up in this unwanted outcome. We're always yelling at each other, and it's just not helping. Now we're becoming bitter and growing apart from each other. And so they know that I'm, here to help them. So I go right into the emotions and I ask, you know, now that you've explained the problem and I explained to you that this work helps to resolve the emotions, what emotion do you feel is behind this problem that you want to work on? And they always say the same thing, like always, fear or anger. And what I tell them is that's just the tip of the iceberg of the full range of challenging emotions that are controlling this conversation.
And so they say fear or anger is the emotion they're struggling with, but you're saying that's only the tip of the iceberg. There's something that else that's going on there. Why do they experience it as fear or anger when there's something else?
Because it's supposed to feel so when I tell people there's deeper emotions underneath that the mind really doesn't want you to be experiencing and therefore will keep you in fear and anger on this surface level. One person said, "What do you mean? Fear or anger feels terrible to me. Like, how can you say that that's not a core emotion? That's the whole reason why I want to resolve this is because I'm controlled by my anxiety and stuff." And so what I tell people is those two emotions are what I call empowering feelings. They're empowering emotions. Why? Because from that place, it's so uncomfortable that your body jumps into action trying to fix the problem. So your mind, as I've said maybe before, is part of the survival mechanism of the body, is part of the brain, which is part of the survival mechanism of the body. The way the brain or the mind helps you to survive and thrive in life is by solving problems. And so, in order to solve a problem, it has to put you into the right emotional space and motivate you to jump into action, to do something, to go into action. Fear or anxiety or anger, frustration, or even rage makes the body almost automatically jump into action trying to resolve the problem. A lot of times I tell people, you've come to me and looked on the internet and come to me because your body took an action based on the anxiety. So the mind actually wants you there. And it will actually keep people locked into those two emotions for years in the hope that you'll eventually solve the problem and it won't come up anymore.
Yeah, so you're saying the mind wants to solve a problem. There's some issue, and maybe this is how it's the survival mechanism or a way to solve a problem to perpetuate, your existence. You need to solve this problem, and therefore the mind is creating fear or anger so that you will then take action to resolve the problem.
Yeah. The
But the
mind is all about motivating you to move your life forward and solve the problems to move your life forward. Yes.
Okay. But the root issue is not necessarily this fear or anger in itself. There's something else that is the real problem, but then the mind is spurring you to action by having you feel fear or anger.
Yes. And it
Okay.
is sort of the opposite that way. And what I described to that person, it is sort of odd, isn't it? That the emotions that you would say feel the worst are the fear or the rage, but it does work the opposite that way. The mind would actually rather have you feel that because these things make you jump into action. The emotions underneath that, don't make you jump into action. They don't feel the same way. So what I tell people is we can work on your anxiety problems around this or your anger problems around this, but usually what happens is it's sort of like cutting off, if you can imagine your emotional system with all these anxiety behaviors on top, like a lawn, and all the anxiety behaviors are like dandelions with a central root system. We can work on every single issue with anxiety and fear or frustration that you have with your loved one, but I can almost guarantee that we solve that because we haven't gotten to the root. It's just going to pop up somewhere else. And they usually understand, they see that. Yeah, I resolve this problem and then this problem pops up, giving me the same fear or anxiety.
Yeah, so you're saying the fear or anxiety is really more of a consequence of something, some deeper emotion. It's just manifesting itself in this way. It hasn't actually resolved the deeper issue.
Yeah.
So it'll pop up some other way. It'll show itself in some other way because that core issue hasn't been resolved.
Yeah. And that's why the mind, even though you might be able to solve that particular problem, the anxiety, because you haven't gotten to the root of it, will just show itself somewhere else. And then you're just on this perpetual cycle of solving problems around the same topic through anxiety and stuff. So what I tell people is you got to go underneath that. And when you think about it, anxiety and fear, they're fearing something. It's fearing something. What is it fearing? And anger and frustration are more what I call protective emotions. When you get angry, it's sort of protecting you. It's a protective emotion. And so it's protecting you from something. So anxiety or fear is fearing something, and anger or frustration is protecting you from something. What is it fearing or protecting you from? Feeling worse. And so to help people to see the emotion underneath, what it's fearing is the worst case scenario of that particular topic that you brought to me, your son doing drugs or this behavioral issue in your marriage. It's fearing the worst case scenario.
Great. So instead of playing emotional whack-a-mole to try to knock down the fear and anxiety and the anger and all that, can you get then into what is that deeper emotion?
Yeah, yeah. And so what I explain is it's fearing the worst case scenario, but it's actually not fearing the event. And so even when I'm working with people in which their loved ones are having like drug problems, addiction problems, and maybe they've even overdosed or gone to jail, what I tell people is your worst case scenario exactly is sort of not what the mind actually fears. Your mind is actually not fearing the worst case scenario. It's fearing the emotions that it thinks it's going to feel for the rest of this body's life. If honestly something terrible and tragic happens to my son, I tell them it's not the event you're scared of, it's the feelings that it will bring up, possibly for the rest of your life. Guilt, shame, loneliness, depression, grief, all of those that you
And
see here.
let me make sure I understood that. So let's suppose you have a parent whose child has some kind of addiction, as well as maybe other problems. The thing that the parent is fearing is not the addiction per se. It's that if something happens and they were not able to prevent it or help their child, then they'll have these feelings of guilt, shame, you know, depression. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, when you think about it, I know this sounds sort of callous, but what if the worst case scenario happens, but you felt nothing but peace? It wouldn't be really considered a problem to the system. And so, really, it's all about the feelings. The worst case scenario is going to bring up these feelings. And the reason why these particular feelings are resisted by the mind is because the body becomes static. If you've ever seen a person wallowing or dwelling in guilt, shame, loneliness, you know, that body doesn't move to solve problems. Well, it's almost as if your life comes to a standstill. And sometimes you might have seen people in, the throes of a depression, they'll stay in bed for days and stuff. So the body's not moving to solve the problem. It's actually being very static. And the whole person's life comes to a standstill because why? Because the mind does not know how to resolve these feelings that are, so that's the fear and the anger on top, right underneath the surface of this weed structure, if you want to call it, are these middle emotions here. And as soon as you go underneath there, the mind doesn't know how to solve that. And so that's why a person will just sort of wallow and dwell there for a while.
Okay, so in the example where a parent has a child who has an addiction issue, this is the actual feeling, but then their body goes back to anxiety or anger to try to process and try to move forward. So they are trying to get their child to end the addiction and the problematic behavior, change, something so that the parent feels more comfortable, more at ease, and they don't have these feelings. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And
Yes.
then so so this is the root of the issue is a little bit in this case. Of course, maybe the child has addictions, but the parent not being able to process their feeling bounce to this surface emotion to try to resolve in their own internal conflict or inability to resolve this situation they think is problematic. The thing that you had mentioned though about kind of being callous is if you're a parent and your child has an addiction issue, you do want them to get better. You do want them to seek treatment or whatever. And therefore, it's natural and understandable that you would want to take action. You'd want, you know, to move something forward. What is the parent supposed to do in this situation?
And so and so basically the initial problems that parents come to me in this particular kind of situation, or even it could be in just behavioral problems in a marriage, relationship problems in marriage, is there's a communication breakdown that whenever they try to discuss things with their loved one, it's already gotten to the point where both of them don't want to talk about it because it just brings up really bad feelings and they're not connecting over it. And so, I do tell the parents though, like, we will still help your loved one. You will still take action, but you will do it from a place where the emotions that are driving all these behaviors that you don't want are resolved. And so when you're helping your loved one or you're talking to them or taking action, it's going to come from a more place of stable peace rather than this anxious, pull your hair out. What do I do? What do I do?
I see. So if the parent is not feeling these emotions, but is maybe more at peace with the situation, then when they deal with their child or in a loved one in a relationship, they're able then to be more constructive or their interactions are more helpful.
Yeah. So think about, anxiety and anger are more from the survival lizard brain where you're just trying, I would say a lot of the focus from which the mind is coming from the back in the amygdala area where it's more like a lizard brain fight flight response. You're just trying to eliminate the trigger. And when that happens and you know that you're in that because you're feeling strong anxiety or strong frustration or rage even, and when you're there and you're operating from that fight, flight, survival mode of your brain, your mind gives you very limited options to solve the problem because all it's trying to do is eliminate the trigger. But it's just causing a problem with the other person because they're coming from that too, and you're triggering each other, and the whole thing starts to escalate. One person coming at the other with a fight, flight, survival mind triggers the other, and now they're both doing it together, and they escalate each other. And so we have to get we have to de-escalate the emotions. And so when you do that, it's not coming from the fight flight center, it's coming more from the frontal lobe, where now your mind is giving you a lot more options to resolve the problem, to analyze things more carefully. Yeah.
And that helps them realize that this is not the way to help, the situation. How do they actually then help resolve the issue? How do they deal with that core emotion? If this is not the core emotion, what is the core emotion? What is the real issue
For the parent,
for the parents?
so like I said, what's bringing up the anxiety and the anger, which is causing the whole focus to go to the more fight, flight, survival mode, is not wanting to feel the emotions of the worst case scenario if that occurs in this situation, which could be your loved one in the hospital, jail, and so, or just never having a life that, worth living and stuff. And so, you know, all the feelings that that would bring up in a person if that were to happen is what the parent is really fueled by. That's what's actually fueling the entire behavior. It's not the anxiety or the anger. It's what it's fearing. It's what it's protecting you from. And it's these, when you go underneath the surface, there's core emotions too, but these are right underneath the surface here, the guilt, shame, loneliness, depression, and grief.
Yeah, so how can you help a parent not have that feeling? Because they do fear for their child or the loved one, where you have conflict, you know, that is just a feeling that they have. How can you resolve that? That seems like that's core to their being.
Yes. And so the way any kind of feeling is resolved is by feeling it. And so when I say resolved, I also want to say these feelings, anxiety, anger, guilt, shame, loneliness, depression, or grief, these are not necessarily mean that you're broken, that you need healing, that you have an illness. These are emotions like any other emotion, happiness, joy, peace, excitement. And the body just naturally feels them. And so whenever you feel something and take it in, you experience it, it ends, it goes, it peaks, and then it goes down. You do the same exact thing with these. It's just that the mind doesn't know that because it's too scared of being in anxiety because it doesn't know how to solve these problems of the guilt, shame, loneliness, depression, grief. It doesn't know how to solve that. And so as bad as these are, what I tell people is what the mind is really, really scared about are the core emotions. So there's like a third level to this. Yeah. And so when I do work with somebody, I explain this whole thing at the levels of the emotions, but I do tell them we should go right to the core root emotions because again, this is a lot like a weed system with multiple dandelions on top of your lawn, but they're all going to a central taproot, core root. These emotions here, these 5 emotions that we've found. So these emotions here, as much as the mind resists the grief, loneliness, depression, it totally wants to avoid these to the point where sometimes it hides these emotions from somebody. So when I mentioned the core emotions are self-loathing, despair, that life can be meaningless, overwhelming sadness due to loss, unresolved loss, emotional pain due to unresolved suffering or fear of survival, sometimes they say, well, I don't have self-loathing. I don't feel like I have that. I have guilt or shame, but I don't feel like I have self-loathing. And so what I tell them is, well, your mind has effectively kept that from you, but the guilt and the shame especially is pointing towards self-loathing. If you go further down the root system, you'll hit self-loathing, and that's where we should go, is to the root of that. But lots of times, high functioning people don't even realize they're operating from this. They're having problems and they're having recurring problems in their relationship that are all fueled by this, but they don't even realize they have it because the mind has thoroughly kept this from them. It's doing its job. It's doing its job. So the reason why it totally hides these, well, you could see there that if a person dwells or wallows there and doesn't know how to resolve the problem there, self-loathing, self-destructive thoughts can start coming out if this is dwelled upon with no solution. I'm a terrible person. I don't deserve to be here. Life is so meaningless. What's the use of going on? The mind doesn't know how to solve these problems. So now the body is not static and gone into a stasis. It's sort of moving backwards. So an anxiety and fear, it's still trying to solve the problem moving forward. And the middle emotions in depression, grief, loneliness, and guilt, it's become static. But now here in the core root emotions, it's going backwards and becoming self-destructive.
That seems that this is potentially quite dangerous if the mind is in this state where it seems like there are no solutions, nothing can be done. People may have suicidal ideation, people may give up. Um, can you address how does your protocol handle that? How do you get people to be able to process these deep core root emotions in a safe way? Like
Yeah,
how do you do that?
yeah. So the coaching protocol is really actually very simple for resolving these emotions. It's actually done very carefully. It's done with gently, actually, considering it's done very with a lot of caring and nurturing. First, I want to say so. The three parts is simply once you identify what the core emotion is. So, say the person that I'm working with has anxiety. Underneath that, it's because I feared having some shame. We point to the core root emotion of self-loathing. So once we've identified where it's going down on one of these five core emotions here, the first thing we do is we relax the body and bring up the meditative inner peace, the what we call the peaceful presence of universal energy. Some people have called it the peace of God, Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, the peace that surpasses all understanding. It's this presence of peace that's inside you and all around you that everyone, no matter how their mind may be thinking and how their body may be behaving, has has this within them and maybe has access to it. Like as long as they can like relax and put their focus there, they have access to it. So we bring that up. And the second part is we feel the feeling. We just bring up the feeling. And that acts, the meditative piece acts as a cushion. So you can feel it and your body doesn't go out of control. And the third thing is I always redirect people, don't go with your mind. So when I'm working with someone, I'll say, don't go with the mind. The mind may try to distract you. The mind may try to come up with some different stories to not do this work. Just don't go with the mind. Else it just doesn't know how to resolve the problem. And so when they just be there and I'm there with them in this meditative piece, feeling the feeling, it gets resolved.
Yeah, it seems to me that when it comes to going with the feeling and not with the mind, a lot of therapy is trying to rationalize in a very, sober way. You have a meaningful life. You shouldn't have to worry about your, sphere of XYZ, survival, etc. You have so much going for you. You have such a great life. Think about all the great things that are happening.
Right.
And it's just a different way of trying to, like, I guess, get the person to the point where it's not an issue. Like, I'm not fearing these things, these situations
So
because,
yeah, a lot of traditional talk methods like that, um, they work at the mind level because it is honestly one mind trying to help another mind to solve a problem that the mind actually doesn't really know how to resolve. And so what it effectively does in saying things like that, you're doing really well, you made a lot of progress, you should be proud of yourself. It backs out of resolving this by simply feeling it. And, it placates you for that particular session, of which I've been through this for years, where you can calm yourself down, but it keeps coming back. It keeps coming back all the time because you haven't really gotten at the root. And if you don't know, how to resolve that, then that's what happens. And I've had worked with clients in which right before we're going into these emotions or as we're going to these emotions, they will say themselves, but things are actually really better. And my son, it's not really as bad. He's making a lot of progress. I'm making a lot of progress. My family's really good. Like they're trying to, make themselves feel better. And what I tell them is, do you see how your mind now has effectively distracted you from resolving this?
yeah,
And
but
go ahead.
wouldn't you say though that if a person actually um, has these affirmations, talks it's kind of like talk therapy. They talk through it and they start actually believing it. Then that could be effective.
I would say there would be a switch if the emotions were processed. Like it's very well possible that the emotions, these kinds of core emotions were processed and they were unaware of it. I've seen that before where they were processed. And it seems like so I have no problem with if the person is able to resolve these, the problem, the recurring problem that they came to me for with just talk coaching, I'm doing better and just say affirmations, then I'm all for that. But usually when they come to me, I do say to them, you probably tried this before and you're still here. Like, so when I do try to work with a person's mind and intellect first, but when I notice if you are coming up with a solution that works or an intellectual statement that works, but they're still harping on it on the background, the mind is still harping on the problem. I'm giving you a solution intellectually, but your mind is not satisfied. And maybe you've seen people like this where they come to you with a problem, they're all emotional about it. You give them an intellectual solution to it. They'll even agree with you. Yeah, yeah, you're right. You're right. I should do that. You're right. I should do that. Then the next week they come back with the same exact problem. And you're like, why didn't you do that thing? Yeah, I know. I know you told me. I know you told me. Yeah, you're right. You're right. When I see that, that tells me there's an emotion underneath that wasn't resolved, that that whole intellectual process didn't get to the root of it.
And so by feeling the feeling, but in the presence of universal peace, you're able then to resolve the feeling, to dissipate that energy. Can you talk a little bit more about how does that work when people actually are in touch with these emotions, these core root emotions in a different environment, in this, peaceful place? How does that actually disperse that energy? How does that actually work?
It's basically, like I said, emotions they just need to be held and experienced in the body to be processed fully. So nobody has a problem processing the feelings of happiness, peace, love, and joy. We take those in readily. And as a result of that, you do feel good for the moment. It peaks and then it goes down, which is why sometimes people say happiness is fleeting, because that's one that you embrace into your system. When these are in you, but they're avoided, the emotion, doesn't go through that process where it's allowed to peak in the body. It just sort of gets stuck there. And this gets actually stored physically in the body. People who work with trauma victims now are realizing it's actually stored in the muscles, in the tissues. It's stored in the body there. And a lot of, modern trauma therapy or even even regular psychology now are realizing that resolving deeper issues are more resolved emotionally or energetically now. They're realizing that. And so it's just a matter of completing the cycle of that particular emotion.
That's great. It makes a lot of sense that when people have these emotions that they have not resolved, that continue to be repressed, continue to be avoided, that you will still continue to have the symptoms or the consequences of those emotions that are unresolved.
Or it'll just pop out in another way.
Yeah, it'll
Yeah.
show itself in a different way.
Yeah. Something like self-loathing can pop out as people pleasing, as procrastination, as enabling, because you don't want to have to feel bad about yourself if this thing goes wrong. If somebody gets mad at you and guilt you, if you try this thing out and it fails and then you just feel shame, they're all pointing to the self-loathing. And so, and again, it's resolved the same exact way. Feelings do not, especially the challenging ones, feelings do not need to be healed. They just need to be held. And so in the process, you realize it's not that you were broken or ill or needed healing. It's just that there was an emotion there that wasn't processed. And what I also tell people is the body is designed to feel feelings. It was designed that way. That notice that the physical body itself doesn't have an opinion on the physical sensation that's running through it. It's the mind, because of its survival mechanism, that doesn't like certain things, because it doesn't want you to, it doesn't know how to resolve self-loathing, so it doesn't want you to go there because it's trying to protect you. but the body really doesn't have a problem feeling it. But when we also bring up the meditative piece, it makes it so much easier, more nurturing and gentle. It that the shift is also almost immediate, and it's long lasting, what we find.
That's great. Before we wrap, just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the method and the safety considerations. These are very deep um, emotions, deep feelings, and should be explored with care through some kind of process. Just wanted to have you maybe just say a few words before we end about what people should or shouldn't do. How should they engage? And once they have this realization that this is really what's going on, this core root emotion is really the source of a lot of the surface feelings. What
Yeah.
should they do to actually deal with that? You don't want people running around willy-nilly, you know, doing things in an uncontrolled way. Can you talk about that just, very briefly?
Yeah. Even though I've explained this, how it works intellectually, and I've done it in videos, I always do say also, like in the book and in other videos, it is explained the four key elements that I feel will be necessary to help this, emotional resolution to be effective for you. And they are safety, mental stability, sobriety, and self-motivation. And so when I'm working with somebody, I assess that, you know, they have these four elements, or I do have videos for it, and I do suggest before you do a meditation like this, look at this video that explains these four elements that'll help it to be effective for you. And when I make these kinds of meditational videos, I always say, if you feel you need further support and help, definitely get the help of service professionals, support professionals, meditation teachers as you need it.
That's great. Okay. Thanks so much for your time, Mike. We will continue next time.
Thank you.